The Gravel Institute recently published a documentary basically exposing the police gangs in LA. This was absolutely amazing what this documentary entailed. It focuses itself around a journalist by the name of Cerise Castle, I believe that's her name. She kind of started this whole thing. So, in the wake of the George Floyd protest, she was at a protest and she identified herself as a journalist, and she was shot with non-lethal bullets, and she was landed in the hospital. And once she got out, she began looking into these police gangs. I believe I have the story correct so far. And she read up a lot on it, and I would say at this point she's pretty much an expert on it. She's learned so much, and she basically exposed them. She exposed them. So what I want to do is I want to read for you a couple of the names of gangs that she's confirmed, and I just want to point out that she's confirmed the existence of at least 18, and that's just it's like confirmation, like she knows for a fact that these truly do exist. So this isn't even all of them; these are just the ones that she was able to confirm. But I'll read to you a couple of them, not the entire 18. But here we go. So we have Little Devil's Posse, we have the Wayside Whiteys, we have the 2000 Boys, the 3000 Boys, the Jump Out Boys, the Banditos, the Executioners, the Spartans, the Cowboys, the Rattlesnakes, and the Tasmanian Devils. These are all police gangs that are scattered throughout the law enforcement in Los Angeles. Yeah, and if you still don't think this is somehow legit, the existence of the Rattlesnakes is acknowledged by the U.S. Department of Justice. Yeah, it is. And that's only the Rattlesnakes. I only picked them as an example. I'm sure many, if not all of the rest of the police gangs' existence is acknowledged by the federal government in some way, shape, or form. And I have to admit, this is my first time hearing about this. Like, you know that the police in this country is corrupt. You know about the atrocities and police brutalities and wrongdoings that our law enforcement commits, seemingly at this point on a regular basis, like it's a normal Monday or Tuesday, right? But when I saw that documentary, and when you actually find out that this is legit, it seems almost comical, like a bad movie. It's like you're watching some movie about dirty cops, but this is real life. You know, when I first got into politics, the first political book that I ever read was a book called The Shock Doctrine. It was written by a woman by the name of Naomi Klein, incredibly amazing woman, author, and book. And essentially what this book entails, without getting too far in the weeds, it's about this state of shock that populations or societies may go through, right? Moments of peril. And what happens is, and I'm putting this in extremely layman's terms, I recommend you go read the book if you haven't. Legislators, lawmakers, the politicians, they come in this moment of shock, they're very corrupted, and they try to push permanent legislation that's essentially detrimental to the mass of people, right? But what this book did was it really went into detail and talked about many of the atrocities that America would commit in foreign nations, specifically the overthrowing of foreign governments. And when I read this for the first time and I found out about this, it seemed almost comical. Like, you sound like an outright conspiracy theorist when you say it. Like, what? The United States of America is overthrowing foreign governments? There was a coup in Chile that was perpetrated by the CIA. Like, you sound absolutely insane. But it's true and it's factual, and these things are documented. And so when I saw this documentary, it was very eye-opening. And this was just in LA. What about the so many other law enforcement agencies across the country? What about in my own hometown, in my own home state? How many gangs exist in my own police departments, the ones that police my area? I mean, it's insanely scary. And so, I mean, she uncovered so many facts here throughout this documentary, and I'll link the documentary down below, and I will also link her website. So she published, I think it's like a 15-part series. It's very extensive, but it's also very specific, and it's very well detailed. So the sheriff of LA County, so this is the backlash that she's gotten from this. So first of all, before I even get into that, This woman has that she had to hire security because she received so many death threats. She has to walk around in a bulletproof vest because she fears for her life, and completely understandable. So the sheriff of LA County has instructed anyone that she reported on to personally sue her. When she attempted to attend a press conference featuring the police department, she was detained. I mean, it's insane. The family of Mr. Vargas, a man that was killed by the police, they interviewed his family, and his family talked about how they were being surveillanced by the police. And during their interview, which lasted 30 minutes, 3 police cars drove by. 3. So even during the interview, they were being spied on. It's absolutely insane. And there's a man by the name of Art Gonzalez who was seemingly hailed as a hero that they highlighted in the documentary for saving, I believe, a young child it was. And he aired out one of the groups, the executioners, I believe, and now he's being targeted by them. And he feels unsafe. And this is a former police officer. So they'll even turn on you, one of their own, if you try to air them out or expose them. I mean, there's a man by the name of Andres Guardado that he was killed as a result of police brutality, and they believe that he was killed for a gang initiation. I mean, this is what they do. I mean, and a lot of the police killings is for initiation and like planting of evidence, planting a gun, drugs. All of these things may be what these officers, quote unquote officers, they're really gang members at this point. I hesitate to even refer to them as law enforcement after watching that documentary, but they'll do these types of unethical and moral lacking things to get initiated into their gang. Like, that's part of their initiation process. But it speaks to a broader problem that I have with policing. Policing, there's this fantasization about police in America and law enforcement officers that they're there for the greater good. They're there to save you from harm, and that's all that their job entails, when in fact, it's not really. In fact, that's not what they were even created for. They were created initially for control, right? They were created to control what population? Minorities, blacks, yes, but specifically along class lines, those that didn't have much, the poor people of this country, right? In the northern free states, this Guardian article highlights police precincts developed in emerging industrial cities to control what economic elites refer to as rioting, which was the only effective political strategy available to exploited workers. But as described in the text Community Policing, rioting was described as such, actually a primitive form of what could become union strikes against employers. And the modern police force not only provided an organized, centralized body of men, and they were all male, legally authorized to use force to maintain order, it also provided the illusion that this order was being maintained under the rule of law, not at the whim of those with economic power. In other words, police were never created to protect and serve the masses, and our legislative and judicial systems, from Congress to the courts to prosecutors, have made this clear. That's an article from The Guardian that I just pulled from. But I mean, there's so many different examples. Malcolm X talked beautifully about the police in a speech that he made, and he basically talked about how people of this country see the police differently depending on what your circumstance is. So if you're a guy that's wealthy and you have a house on the hill, or you're in a really wealthy neighborhood or whatever, you'll get treated differently. A white man in a suit, you'll get treated differently by a police officer than a person that's in a neighborhood population largely is comprised of minorities, and it's a low-income neighborhood. You'll have a different opinion of police because you're treated differently. And then you have the propaganda from the mainstream media that hails these gang members as heroes, and it makes these suburbanites, these middle-class individuals that have never had a bad outing with the police in their life, look at the police as if they're these heroes that's there, untainted, that are just there to serve the greater good of the population, when in fact, that's not the reality for so many people. And the media plays a hand in justifying the outright, just outlandish and unethical tactics that police use to quell movements, how they crush movements like Black Lives Matter movements out advocating for Black lives, for example. They'll deploy these armed guards, aka police, aka the gang members, to squash these movements. Labor movements. They'll deploy the police to squash these movements. It's a means of control. It's a means of subjugation and conformity. And this documentary really highlighted something that isn't talked about much. It's very frightening and it's very scary, but this is real. This is the reality. It's no longer, in fact, it never was just, one bad apple or two bad apples or a couple bad apples. The entire tree is poisoned all the way down to the roots, and we need to do something about it quickly, because the more we allow these problems to linger, the worse they will get.